It's science.
This is your host, Justin Romare, with the Starving Podcast, and my co-host here is
Jordan. Hey guys.
Jordan. We're back. How's it going today?
Going all right. It's nice and clear and sunny in Prague, which is spectacular for this time of year.
Why do you always mention the weather?
Because it's
sunny,
usually
bro.
miserable here, and that it's like I'm being serious. That it's like a day of sunlight is I pray for it. I counted it. We had one sunny day in like 2 weeks the other day. It adds up. Anyway, you can go on.
Oh man! So we have a special guest today. His name is Jed Snelson. He is an adaptive athlete, 4 times at the CrossFit Games, a 5-year professional in motocross, and raced for 17 years total. He's helped a lot of MMA athletes, X Games athletes with their strength and conditioning, and works as a trainer and coach for motocross and supercross athletes. He is currently ranked 2nd, fittest seated athlete on earth, and he just won the Adaptive Open for seated athletes, the fittest in the Open. So Jed, what's up?
Hey guys, how's it going?
Great, man. Great to have you on. Obviously, a great rap sheet here, and obviously so much to talk about today regards to your life, your diet, and how you approach things as an adaptive athlete.
Yeah, I'm excited to share and hopefully give a little bit of a glimpse on what it looks like competing on a higher level as an adaptive athlete.
Absolutely.
All right, Jed, so I'll kick us off. This is a question we ask all of our guests, and we ask, what is the biggest mistake people make when they're deciding to start a diet?
I think to say one thing is kind of hard. I think there's 2 things that kind of go hand in hand when I think about that. And I think one is trying to do everything at once. And then second, that kind of goes hand in hand to that is patience. I think that people try and make changes and it's kind of like trying to quit smoking, right? Like people try to go cold turkey and it just, for most people, that doesn't work. And whatever changes you're trying to make to your diet or whatever, sugar addictions or bad food addictions that you're trying to adjust, it's hard when you try and go cold turkey and change everything at once. I've never even done that with my athletes that I work with coaching, who I help with nutrition. We've always tried to start small, make small adjustments, and even though we know where we need to go or where exactly we want to go, we try and change it over time. And then I think knowing that you have to be patient with yourself as far as your results, and that everybody wants, to do a diet for 4 weeks or whatever, and they want to see results right away, or they want to see, whether it be, uh, visual results or whatever. It takes time. And so I think that's the biggest thing for me is just not trying to do everything at once and be patient when it's a process, right? If you're trying to do something right, you want to make habits that will last. And so you can't do that all at once.
I like that. That's something we've talked about a few times here is if you're making a change, instead of thinking about it as a diet, think about it as a lifestyle change. So, being able to have that human side to a change in what you're eating. Don't just look at it in the short term. I like that. Cool.
Yeah, exactly. Like so many people, they, you don't start a gym program and then start working out 6 days a week, for however long,
Yeah.
and just be able to handle that. You have to build over time. And so your diet's the same way. When we look at it and when we understand how important nutrition and exercise are going hand in hand and that they're almost equal, you can't expect to change one all at once when you wouldn't change the other all at once.
Yeah. I like that. Cool.
Yeah, no, it's good. I think and to make those lifestyle changes and to start eat intrinsically, which is how we approach our clients at Consistency Breeds Growth. We have people that want to sign up with us for like a month, and it's really hard to coach someone who signs up for such a short amount of time because we feel that to really make true long-term progress, long-term adherence to whatever diet protocol that you're prescribing um, to the client or athlete. You need longer than that. And I'm wondering what your perspective is. So there are a lot of coaches out there now that, and it seems like these are the coaches making the most money. I don't know how, but they're really they're not like a big fan, or at least the way that their Instagram portrays things. And maybe it's just to bring clients in. I don't know, but they're like, um, you had a bad day, it's okay, like sort of patting them on the back, like let them cry on their shoulder, sort of mentality. Um, and for us, like honestly, I have clients approach me, and I'm sort of the same. I'm like, it's okay, don't worry. But I'm not like you didn't mess up, like no, you failed. Like for that meal, like you were adhering to a particular thing, and something prescriptive that we're both on the same team trying to strive for, right? Whatever those goals are, and anything not conducive to that um, is it's not a good thing. So, um, and I think that there's a balance between trying to be one, um, helping the client adhere best as possible to the best possible diet, but also, coming in from their lens and their perspective to say, okay, this person was eating fast food for 10 years, and now I have them prepping all the food. I have them eating a particular amount of macronutrients and things like that, having them sleep more hydration. Like they were doing almost everything wrong. So I'm wondering like how you might take a client or someone that you're training and you know just give a more detailed description of what that looks like at the very beginning.
Yeah, so and it's been a little bit of a challenge with me too, because most of the athletes I've worked with on that level are very young. And primarily working in Supercross and Motocross that way, most of those athletes are, average age of between 19 to 21. And so it's tough to have somebody that young to start out and just, expect them to have the discipline to just, okay, you're a professional athlete, you're really trying to make these changes, and we got to do this all at once. So what I've generally done is we've kind of taken it on a week by week basis, knowing that we're trying to build a long-term plan and say, okay, you spoke about somebody that, like you said, for 10 years, maybe they've just inherently eaten fast food or whatever. Instead of trying to take all that away at once, we'll say, okay, let's make it a goal of, one, making better choices for fast food, and two, let's limit ourselves to only having it 3 days a week, for that first couple weeks, and then see, logging stuff, see how that goes. And then when they've done that, then we'll go, okay, now we're going to limit down to, 2 or 1 day a week. And then just slowly make those adjustments so that you are building habits, so that when, by the end of it, they and I think that too, by doing that too, by making micro adjustments, that we see what really affects the individual. Because I think a large part of this too is we try and look at, especially people in general trying to make diet adjustments or trying to make, nutritional adjustments or whatnot. Like they see it was successful for somebody else, especially with social imaging today and whatnot, and they think that they can just copy and paste that, and, and it'll work for them too. But one of the things I've definitely found through my own nutritional journey is that, not everybody's built the same. We all have different blood types, we all have different chemical makeups, and so what worked for somebody else may not work for me or another person. And so that's another thing, is by making slow changes, we see how that affects us. And maybe it's a step on, well, that didn't really work for me, or, oh, wow, that really affected me when I noticed, I started adding, this type of, vegetable, or this type of, specific carbohydrate in into my diet. And so you see more positive reactions that way, because people tend to buy in when they see how individual little micro changes help them. And and then it's easier to make more adjustments seeing that progress that way.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's really good. So I think basically from that we could take you have to do a really detailed assessment of who you're working with, right? Because then you can outline
Big time.
goals that are on a weekly basis that are more realistic, right? So like if I come to a client that eats fast food all the time, right, and I give them our intrinsic diet blueprints, okay, that tells them exactly what to eat and when to eat it for every meal. They need to prep everything and yada yada. And the goal is to start doing that, right? Then I'm setting them up for failure as a coach, right? But if I have someone who
The,
has been tracking their macros or something a little bit more rigorous in terms of dialing in their nutrition, and I give them something along the lines that's a bit more prescriptive for, let's say, their genes and their blood work and things of this nature, maybe that's a better segue for someone than working with someone who's has hyperinsulinemia or high cholesterol and really just been eating really bad for multiple years.
I think in that,
Absolutely.
yeah, I think in that case too that, I there's something big even in my own dieting is that establishing that sort of that time in that that buying into the program. So, you know, you can for me when I started out on for me I'm very all or nothing. I don't like to be, you can have, crap 2 or 3 times a week. I'm much better with a clean break. But along with that, the first day's hard, the second day's a little bit less hard, the third day, and fourth, fifth, first week in, it's not nearly as problematic. And I think that just with most people that once you have time put into something, it gets harder to sort of derail yourself. Or if you do make a mistake, you say, okay, like Justin said earlier, it's one meal, you screwed up. Let's not take that one meal and let it spiral out of control and lose all of that time in. I don't know a better term for it, but just something that comes to mind. I also found I don't have the paper in front of me now, but that once you go from a very wide diet, so something that's incorporating fast food, processed carbs, all that sort of stuff, that when you're eating a less varied diet, but varied in the sense that there's lots of crap in it, your body actually will start to crave that stuff less. I mean, that goes along with the insulin responses, but I'll get the reference for the reading list, but that the idea of eating a smaller, more nutrient dense diet, you actually, never mind the physiological response, but the psychological response, your body just doesn't start to be as hungry anymore. So you can actually stick to your macros much more effectively because you're eating for fuel as opposed to I'm stressed out today. All right, I have to, it's a birthday to celebrate. So yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. And then that makes it easier to make those long-term adjustments and make that more of a lifestyle than uh, a fad,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah, and this is like what Jordan said with this article. You know, two things. People that eat sort of the same foods all the time end up inherently eating less. This is just something that happens, and this is why a lot of restrictive diets, like uh, vegans and things like that, people end up losing a lot of weight on these food composition based diets because they end up eating a lot of the same foods. Which it's in the beginning it's good, and then obviously we have a rate of 80% people that go vegetarian or vegan actually revert back. Not saying that some people can't follow that, they can. And then the second point is, especially with carbohydrates and sugar and refined carbohydrates, your body, in terms of metabolic flexibility, starts to really only know how to process carbs very well. And therefore, when all the carbohydrate is used up from your last meal, what happens? You're hungry again. And you eat carbohydrates again because that is what you metabolize best because that's what your body knows how to do. Um, and eventually, obviously, you can, start to build up too much glucose in the blood, and this is where hyperinsulinemia comes in, which leads to diabetes and all these other things. So, yeah, it's definitely a real thing that that people experience when it comes to their trying to build a healthy relationship with food. You have to really assess that, and I think Jed, you would agree with me that when it comes to dieting and nutrition, if people really want help, they shouldn't resort to an app um, so much to help. If they really want guidance, they really want to build lifestyle change. It's really hard to get what you need from an application online or a built-in program that's not specified for you. You're sort of um, you're wasting time because eventually you're going to have to, if you don't reach where you're going to be, you have to resort to getting a coach anyways, or someone that's going to be able to help you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with that 100%.
It makes sense. Um, so yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about your story. There are a lot of different adaptive athletes out there in the sport of CrossFit. You have, paraplegic athletes, congenital amputations. Um, we work with an athlete, Nick Noel. He's a fighter for Bellator that has a congenital amputation of his arm, just formed by basically blood clots in utero. So this is how basically he was born. Could you tell us, define a little bit, you know, what being a paraplegic athlete is, and um, tell us sort of your story of how you've used it to your advantage and how your life's changed as a result of that, and how you use that to motivate yourself and your clients.
Yeah, so being a paraplegic basically is um, so it's first of all it's a damage to the spinal cord, and so there's a cutoff between you know physical use of the muscles and connection to the brain, where that there's been nerve damage there, so that I have no control of specific group of muscles, and depending on where that damage is in the spinal column. For me, I was damaged at the T12 um, segment of the spinal column, and so that means that basically I have no use of my legs. Basically I'm paralyzed from the waist down. When you define the difference between a paraplegic and a quadriplegic is of the generally the C sector, where you have no use of any of your limbs, or there is some nerve damage to where you may have limited use of your forelimbs. Um, and so, like I said, being a paraplegic, I'm specifically a T12. That can go, clear up as high as like a T3 or whatnot, where you may have very limited use of chest, no abdominal muscles or whatnot. You still have use of your arms, but you're limited on core and your legs as well. Um, so that's kind of the category where I fall in there, is as a T12. I have no use of my muscles from the waist down. Now, one thing that I'll kind of touch upon that's kind of a misnomer is, just because I don't have control of those muscles doesn't mean necessarily that they're not active or that they don't work.
Okay.
Um, you have different cases where, depending on how the damage is done to the spinal cord, those muscles are just non-active, right? Like they don't do anything. But then you have other cases like myself where I don't have control. They're very active on their own. So I deal with a lot of spasms, and a spasm can mean that you could physically see it, where my legs are shaking or whatnot, and the muscles are actually fighting. But in other cases, like what I deal with, is the muscles don't necessarily, my legs don't shake and they're not all over the place all the time, but they're in constant contraction, where those muscles are constantly like, contracting and just creating a lot of tension. And especially if I get uncomfortable in any way, or tight, they're just constantly fighting me, which from an athlete standpoint can almost be one of the more frustrating things at times, when I'm doing stuff, but my legs are actually, physically fighting against whatever I'm trying to accomplish, versus just being stagnant and letting me, do my thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was an adjustment. When my accident happened, it was a racing accident. So just to give you a little bit of a background, I had raced motocross. I had raced for quite a while, and then I raced professionally as a. I always compare it to baseball because that's the easiest picture to paint. I was more of a minor league athlete in the level that I raced at, and it just got to the point to where I saw I went as far as I was able to go with my abilities in the racing world, and so I had kind of retired from that, but I had made some connections, and 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 I was always known as being one of the more fit riders. Like I was never one of the fastest racers, but I was always, I would be there till the end. And so a lot of these guys that I raced against, would be faster than me and have a lot more natural ability, but I would beat them a lot of times because when it came towards the end of the race, I was still going the same pace I was at the beginning of the race, and a lot of them would get tired and fall off, and then I would be able to pass them, or outlast them. And so that led to some opportunities to become a strength and conditioning coach on the major league level, in Supercross and Motocross, and work with some athletes that were racing at the factory level, and kind of spin a new career from there. So I did that for a while, and until I had gotten married, and then eventually had our daughter. And being a strength and conditioning coach in pro sports, full time at that level is not really conducive to a family lifestyle.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be an absentee father and whatnot, so I kind of started segmenting out of that. And then when I did that, during my time as a strength and conditioning coach, I didn't really race. Well, I didn't race at all. I didn't really ride dirt bikes or anything because I was around it every day. That's not really how I wanted to spend my time off with my family and what. So when I transitioned out of being a conditioning coach, I did have the desire to kind of get back into doing some racing, because I'm definitely a person that has to stay active, and that competitive gene is in me. And so I started racing, kind of on a regional level again, from a vet class perspective, and that's when I got injured. I was at a winter race, and had basically we have things here in Boise called inversions, where we'll get stagnant air that'll come in and kind of create a pocket, and we'll have freezing temperatures for long periods of time. And we had that, and then we had a sand track where they ripped the track, and the track was fine. But what has happened was I had a mishap where I was thrown from my bike and thrown off the track, and so where I hit the ground, it was frozen about 2-3 inches deep, so it was basically like hitting concrete. And that's what caused the accident that caused the damage to my spinal cord and paralyzed me. So so sorry, I lost a little bit of where I was going with that, but just to kind of give you a perspective on how I ended up, where I was. Um, and so when I did become paralyzed, and went through that, it was something where I kind of talked about, having self-awareness. I knew that I had to try and find something to channel my competitive drive. I knew that that would be the biggest thing for me in acceptance of becoming a paraplegic, is having something that I could still channel that energy into. And so my initial intentions was to actually get into downhill mountain bike racing, feeling like it kind of had a similarity to motocross and whatnot. But I also knew in going through this process that I was going to have to get myself back in shape, and and healthy again, to be able to accomplish that. And so I quickly, from somebody who was a strength and conditioning coach, it was to find ways, as a paraplegic, to create quality fitness and get myself into a healthy state again, so that I could get into this mountain bike racing. And so, kind of searching stuff, I found Wheelwad, an organization that kind of leads adaptive CrossFit, in programming, and basically in promoting and sanctioning all the competitions. And so I kind of found some of their stuff, and was able to kind of, and then I found Kevin Ogar online, and some of the stuff that he was doing, which led me to start to look into CrossFit to get in shape and use that as a tool, to create my fitness, as a paraplegic and an adaptive athlete. And then from there, I discovered that, there were competitions, there was an open and whatnot. And so I started to participate in that. And when I participated in that, I was really hooked. And that's when I kind of realized that CrossFit was my competitive channel, and the drive, or the direction that I was going to drive into that way. So, yeah. And so from there, that really, satisfied me that way. It was awesome to see that not only giving me that channel for competition and whatnot, but doing CrossFit as an adaptive athlete has the same benefits as far as functional fitness that it does for any able-bodied athlete. And that not only was I, competing in this sport and having this opportunities, but it was also affecting my regular day life, and that just the independence that I was building through my functional fitness, and making my life, living in a wheelchair and some of the challenges that way easier, by participating in functional fitness, and having that, those benefits in my life was a huge plus as well. And that definitely kept me motivated in being able to have those, side benefits as well. And that's what also got me to where, wanting to be at a higher level and be able to turn this on to others, other adaptive athletes, and other paraplegics, so that they could benefit from that as well.
That's great. I think that we've seen it in the last couple of years. The shift, well, not so much a shift, but at least for the normal people that that want to compete, but maybe not compete to the level of CrossFit games, that you can approach CrossFit any in any which way you want. There's some people that go just to blow off steam. There's some that um, go to compete, obviously. But I think we're all united in the sense that we're going to achieve a better state of health. And health is, I'm sure there's a very nice textbook definition for it, but I like to think my definition of healthy is, well, I can get out of bed in the morning, but my head is also able to get out of bed. So there's nothing weighty pulling me there as well. So it's an incredible story. So
Yeah, it's yeah, that story really should motivate anyone that when life sort of hits you with something that there's still a lot that you can do, and not only that you could just do, but you can also be competitive. You could still go to the CrossFit Games and all these things, and I hope that our listeners take away something from that, because um, you can't just shut your life down for 10 years. Um, it just goes by too quick, and there's so many things out there, and programs like you said, WheelWOD, and other groups that allow people to connect and to train, and to stay active and to find real enjoyment in their lives. I want to go back to something you said before. So, you said T12. So you have the cervical spine, which is the top part of the neck, into the top part of the back, which is, where the thoracic spine starts, which is the T that you mentioned. So T12 is actually pretty low, which is closer to your lumbar spine, which is the low back. Um, I'm wondering, like, and obviously, as you go higher on the spine and you have that damage, that's where obviously more things below can be affected, and this is where you get quadriplegics and things like that. And it obviously affects the muscles, but there are, like, so let's say someone had a very high, um, you know, uh, something in their spine that was damaged very high, like in the cervical spine up at the top, close to the neck. Um, does this shut down muscles like around the organs, like respiratory muscles and other things like that?
It can. And so that's one of the, I can only speak to a medical professional, so I don't have all the
Right.
answers there, but I can speak to, my own situation and kind of relate to that. So yes, all bodily function below that, whatever that spinal cord injury level is affected. And so a lot of people, and it was one of the things that was an eye opener to me too, because I had no idea, and I had the same perspective in that, it's easy to look at somebody in a wheelchair and understand that they've lost the use of their legs, right? Um, from a spinal cord injury, whatever. But there's a lot of other hidden things that people don't understand that is affected as well. Um, Basically, like for example, for me as a T12, like anything below that level, I've lost control of. So I don't have bladder or bowel control. Sexual function, like all those things are affected as well because of my spinal cord injury. And so somebody that's a higher neck injury, depending on the severity of it, yes, they can have that same effect as far as you got into respiratory and whatnot. Like, so depending on the the amount of damage, they can lose control and function of those as well, and may need be in a situation where they need assistance, machine assistance, or device assistance as far as being able to breathe or do that stuff. And so that can be affected as well, from what I understand, you know um, and how it relates to me and in talking to others.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a I just sort of wanted to go in the weeds with that a little bit just so that people understand like how important the spine is and the connection to the brain for all these things. And yeah, you really you provided you provide good information based off of your experience and stuff about what it's really like. It's not just someone that um, is in a wheelchair, but someone that has to deal with other functions from the injury down that are not always taken into perspective from others. But you obviously make the most of it, and it's a huge motivation factor for me. I mean, I'm sitting here like I need to go out for a marathon run, and I don't even run that much, you know. So that's absolutely incredible. I do want to get into a little bit about your nutrition specifically because I don't work with besides the Nick Noel that I mentioned earlier in Bellator. Um, what are your what do your macros look like? Because when I do like basal metabolic rate for someone, right, this is how many calories someone burns at rest. This gives me a really good indication of what their caloric intake is going to be on training days versus non-training days and things like that. But that obviously takes into account their weight. And for you, since the lower half of your body is essentially, not using, um, I don't know if this is absolutely correct, but it's not using oxygenated blood and things like that, for muscle contraction. You said your legs do contract, but you're not getting the amount of volume in terms of reps like you are your upper body. Um, and I'm wondering if your macros change off of that, what your diet looks like as a result of that, and just give us your experience on the nutrition side.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a big change for me, and I really want to explain it, and I really want to give the background so people can understand. Forgive me, I don't have all the science, and I don't have all the professional education behind it. Most of my experience with diet and stuff has just come from my personal experience, and then I have worked with a couple of nutritionists. So I apologize if this is a little dumbed down as far as how I explain it, or terms I use and whatnot. But um, the biggest change was I was always so back to prior to spinal cord injury. I was always a super skinny, high metabolic rate kid. I competed in wrestling at a high level growing up, and then when I got into racing and whatnot, like that's it's more of an endurance. You think of like a triathlete type physical, build and whatnot. And so I was always, very, lightweighted, like super skinny. Like it was more about muscle density and strength per weight ratio than it was actual mass. And so it was a big, it took me a lot to put weight on if I needed to put weight on as an athlete. And So when it was a big shock to me when I went through my accident and had my spinal cord injury, like that I put weight on right away, and especially getting into, I got active right away and whatnot. And obviously there was a period where I lost quite a bit of weight as far as rebuilding myself from the accident that I had. But what I didn't realize is that I was putting a lot of extra weight on just because of uh, I I don't know if a paraplegic, a lot of stuff in your body and the way it works slows down. So like your digestive system, for instance, because your circulation and everything else slows down a lot. Your calves and your hamstrings, those are your main blood pumpers. And so even though my legs don't need the blood, like the having them, circulate in my body was, for anybody is a big deal. And so when you kind of lose that, it definitely changes the way your body is affected with stuff. And so, yeah, so like my digestive system works at a half rate of a normal able-bodied person, as far as the time it takes to digest something properly and process um, process things inside my body. So I went from somebody who, at max weight before, I think the most I had ever weighed in a deep strength process before was like 195. Um, and that's my whole body we're talking about, to, going through my accident, getting into CrossFit and building, really being, really active, really not changing the way I ate at first, thinking my body was still the same, to where I ballooned up to like 215. And I know that doesn't sound like, that only sounds like a 20-pound difference, but you have to remember that that's a 20-pound difference now being carried up top as far as my waist above, where, my legs are, that they're not putting on any weight, that, they've actually atrophied and lost weight. So the percentage of upper body weight versus lower body weight is extremely skewed. And so I was pretty heavy set there for a while, and realized that I needed to make changes to my nutrition program. And so I had started first trying to work with, kind of a generic nutrition person. And I'm kind of like you, Jordan. You spoke about, a clean break when you
Yeah.
make those changes, and being that kind of mentality. I'm the same way.
Yeah,
And
that
so,
it works.
it was like, if I can remember right, my macro numbers was, when I started working with her, was like, 180 grams of protein, roughly about the same carbs, and about 70 grams of fat, I think it was. This was like a couple years ago. So, and I've gone through a lot of changes then. It's like, didn't matter what you really ate to meet those numbers, but just try and meet these numbers.
Yeah.
And so I was doing that, and I wasn't really seeing a lot of change, and I was getting frustrated. And so what I started to do was really look at certain foods, and what was affecting me more. And so what I discovered is, I kind of went off of I quit working with her, and I kind of went on my own, where I just really started looking at what I was eating and how it affected my body. So meaning, like, what kind of carbs I was eating, what types of
Yeah.
proteins, what types of fats. Um and and so really, like, discovering what worked for myself. And so it kind of went back to my own process again of with my athletes, of small changes. And so, in discover eating a certain way for a couple of weeks, and really, as I went through that, really trying to figure out how those foods affected me, how I felt, my energy levels, what I was seeing that way. And and so what I had started to discover with that was, I really needed to be um, low glycemic. And so that was a big factor. But then within that, there were certain things, that I don't know, they might work well for others, but didn't work well for me. For example, like brown rice versus white rice. I couldn't eat brown rice. It was too much to process with my slow digestive system.
Well,
Um, and so, what, well, a lot of people think, it's more nutrient dense and whatnot, that it's better for you. It was hard for me because I wouldn't break it down properly. And just, that's just one example of different things. And so after going through that and really discovering what foods, I knew that I still needed to dial my macros in and really figure out where I should be. And so I was able to find another nutritionist that actually she had come to me as far as help for CrossFit. She's a paraplegic herself at a T3 level, and and a nutritionist and a dietitian. And so I was like, well, maybe we can help each other. Obviously you understand being a paraplegic and how that, how that affects the body. And so I started working with her, and that's where I really got dialed in on my macros. And so between the combination of working with her, and it really took my macros in a direction that, to be honest, when she first started talking to me about the numbers, I was scared because she wanted to get my protein intake down to 100 grams per day. Um, my carbs, she wanted to go way up. So I eat anywhere from 215 to 260 carbs,
Wow.
grams of carbs per day. And then I'm low on fats. I'm about 50 grams of fat per day. Um, and the way she explained it to me was, with a slower digestive system, when you're intaking a lot of protein, it slows everything down, and it slows down the process, and everything kind of backs up in the body that way, because the body's trying to spend whatever energy and circulation and digestive system and just trying to break down all that protein. So basically for me, by eating less protein and eating at a higher carb level, I'm using the carbohydrates, and clean carbs, which you probably get that,
Yeah.
as far as low glycemic, complete carbs and whatnot. Um, by using those as my energy, for whatever my daily processes are, my body's using that for those carbs for energy, and it's using the protein just strictly to rebuild. And the fats fit in where they fit in. But that was the where I really started to see a change and a big turnaround. And so now I'm currently down to 100, back to 179 pounds, which is really ideal for me, especially as a competitor. And because I really started to struggle with gymnastics movements,
Yeah.
muscle ups, pull ups, rope climbs, a lot of these different things because I was so heavy.
Yeah.
And then I was holding on to a lot of inflammation. And that was the big problem, is the inflammation I was holding on to was most of what was carrying that extra weight. And so it was slowing down my recovery. It was, affecting my range of motion. And for somebody that, going through 17 years of racing, my body's banged up. I mean, aside from, being a paraplegic, I have scar tissue. I could list off for, you know, a laundry list of injuries that I've had over a 17-year career of racing. I have bone spurs in certain places, tendonitis, arthritis, and so carrying extra inflammation was even more of an impact for me in trying to be competitive and efficient, in training full time.
Yeah.
And so that inflammation was huge. And when I was able to, make things more efficient in my digestive system for my state, a lot of that inflammation, started to secede and really go away. And so from there, that's when I really started seeing, um, the most improvement in my body. And it was a night and day change for me over a 6-month period
Interesting.
to where I am now, and how I'm able to perform. Um, it's interesting because you sometimes you panic and you look at what you lost, and for me it was a lot of my heavy lifts. I was always one of the heavier lifters,
Hmm.
before, with more body mass. Um, but I gained so much, as a CrossFit athlete with my gymnastics, um, improvements, and just overall improvements everywhere else, and being able to recover, and being able to increase my volume and the way I train and whatnot, because I wasn't carrying all that inflammation and build up that way.
That's crazy. Did you see any? So when you were experimenting with any of your foods, did you sort of, did you research any foods that have that anti-inflammatory nature, or was it just, yeah, how did you do that? I'm curious about this. Like,
Yeah, so it was really trying to discover what foods. You're exactly right. What
mm,
was affecting me from a inflammatory nature, in that causing bloating and whatnot. And so even and so that was a big one. But then even when I was eating those foods based on my activity,
yeah,
um, so for example, like my diet from one stance can almost look a lot like a bodybuilding diet, and that I eat a lot of clean, like just simple, like a lot of white rice,
yeah, but
which
that,
a lot
yeah,
of people want to associate with a bodybuilding diet. But for me, what I've noticed is I don't eat rice after lunch. So for dinner or whatnot, like I have to eat, because if I do, it holds on to more inflammation going into the evening, and I have a lot of bloating and whatnot
yeah.
in processing that and breaking that down. Um, and I don't know, that may be common knowledge for others, but for me, that was just some of the things I discovered in playing around with certain foods and when I ate them
Yeah.
and how I ate them for myself.
That's so
So,
huge, though. I think I I've talked to some people that just I've have found out about the podcast in my own gym, and they're like, well, yeah, I take a shake after training. Other than that, I don't really know what else to do. And I'll say to them, so when you're eating your carbs, what kind of carbs are you eating, and when you're eating them, and I think you'd be surprised at some of the answers you get. One thing I want to mention quickly about the bodybuilding white rice thing is I don't sleep very much at night, so I end up going on like YouTube and I'll read about like bodybuilders, and I need to try it myself.
uh-huh.
But there's a guy that he had the same problem with inflammation, or just couldn't get the brown rice in like enough. Like he was eating 2-3 cups of rice. He's like, yeah, he just couldn't do the brown rice. But he suggested trying sushi rice, which is I think functionally it's a short grain rice that has a different um, different profile than your long grain brown rice. So I don't know, give it a try, and next time you come on, just let us know and we could talk about it. But I need to try it too. But that was yeah, it's really cool. So
Yeah.
yeah, um,
Yeah, I think that your experimentation yourself is awesome because you have to individualize these things and work with your coach to figure out more of an athlete centric approach that's going to help long term. And I think a lot of people don't realize the stomach is sort of like the second brain. Like it has almost as many neurons in it as the brain itself, and it's you know when you ingest things, it's one of our main sort of systems that we interact with on the outside world that goes inside the food that we put into our body. And if you're eating something that you can't digest properly, this can affect mood, it can affect sleep, it can affect inflammation, obviously, and a wide variety of other things. Why a lot of people, when they don't eat right and their food doesn't digest and absorb properly, they end up with depression and um, all of these other things that affect their daily lives. And to go back to sort of your macros that you're on, I think, for protein, we try to get people anywhere from zero point 0.7 grams per pound to 1 pound, 1 gram per pound. And I think based off of your
Uh-huh.
upper body mass, which is where your muscle is, that 100 grams actually fits really well. Your carbohydrates are based off of your training. You're training extremely hard. Some people can take up to 3 grams per pound. So if we estimate your upper body to be like 130 or something like that, you could be upwards of 300, like you said, and still, if you're digesting those things properly. And then the last thing is fat, around 50 grams, which for performance athletes, I would say is moderate to low. But fat is the slowest digesting macronutrient, and it could be that it works best for you to be on more of a lower fat intake because that digestion absorption takes so long. Same thing with protein as well. It does take really long, but fat's even slower. So um, yeah, and as long as what time do you typically train?
So I typically, remind me to go back to that. But before I do, I wanted to
Yeah.
touch upon one thing that you said as far as with the fats and just kind of a little insight there. And so, yes, based on what you described on the fats, it's interesting because that is the one thing that probably has the most fluctuation or adjustment in my diet at times. So part of my diet plan is I follow, regimentedly what I described to you guys, but I do have a refueling day once a week. And what I tend to find is, as far as in listening to my body, and I think a lot of times if we really pay attention to the types of foods we crave, we understand what our body may be lacking. Um, and so for me, what I really discover on those refueling days is the thing that I crave the most and the thing that I end up adjusting the most is my fats. And so I'll take anywheres from 70 up to 90 grams of fat on that refueling day, because that's what my body's craving. Generally I have a few more carbs. I rarely, well, I don't. The protein always stays the same, but it's the carbs and the fats where that tends to adjust on those refueling days because of what my body is craving as far as the rebuilding, from whatever that week's activity is. So, I think it's interesting that you talk about that being low because that is the one thing that I notice that if I need to adjust, depending on whatever my training load is or whatever my activity was that week, that is the one thing is affected the most. So,
Yeah, no, it
um,
makes sense for
but
sure.
back to what you were asking me. So I tend to train most days heavy in the afternoon. My largest period is generally I start 1 to 1:30 in the afternoon and I train till 6:30 at night. 2 3 days a week I do a morning session as well. It's more accessory work, so it's not as physical from a muscle fatigue standpoint. It's more technical, on working on different. Um, I do a lot of core work. Where I'm mostly upper body. It's easy to focus on your chest, your shoulders, your upper back, and whatnot. But I find that where I'm limited on what muscles I have available to me, the more that I can incorporate, the better, right? Um, and so I do a lot of accessory work that's more focused on core, and not just necessarily building that core, but building technical efficiency in that core as far as balance and whatnot. Because I don't have a base like an able body athlete, whereas where yeah, you may be sitting on a bench, for example, and doing a bench press or something of that nature. You're still going to plant your legs for a foundation as far as a balance and keeping yourself uh foundationally strong to go through that exercise or that movement. I don't have that. Like when I'm on a bench, I'm literally floating. It would be like me being on a Bosu ball or a stability ball, or a Pilates, but it has same term for the same piece of equipment, but you get what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
Um, and doing a bench press where you're floating all over the place and you're having to keep your core engaged to keep yourself centered and not flying off the ball with the bar. That's how I am sitting on a bench. And so doing other exercises to really build the reflexes and the stability in my core makes a big difference. So I do a lot of accessory work. I'll sit on a bench and throw a lacrosse ball or a med ball or something at a trampoline where it's bouncing back to me and whatnot, and trying to create those reflexes and that stability balance in my core. I'll do a lot of floating stuff where I'm using a med ball to do certain movements and whatnot, and really, like I said, build that foundational balance in my core, because that affects me when I am doing cleans with a barbell in my chair or other movements that way as well. And so that's a lot what my morning sessions look like, is just working that additional technical accessory work. So sorry I got off a little bit on a skew there, but
no, never a problem. That's
No, it's good, man.
yeah,
We honestly, I could talk to you about your nutrition. There's so much more I want to go into. Don't have the time, and your strength and conditioning and your macro breakdown and everything like that. So we're definitely going to be chatting more in the future about some of the specifics and individualization of your diet and how you utilize that to become a better athlete. But we'll have to bring you back on, and
sure.
because this was
Sure.
absolutely awesome. We loved your story. Our listeners are going to love your story and hopefully find a lot of motivation from it, from the nutrition side, the strength and conditioning side, and just getting up in the morning and being grateful and taking care of their body that they have, because you really only get one of them, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
So, Jed, why don't you tell all of our listeners where they could find you on social media if they want to reach out and chat with you a little bit more?
Yeah. So the easiest is my handle is for both YouTube and for my Instagram is just my full name at Jedidiah Snelson. And so just to spell that out real quick, it's JedidiahSnelson.
Awesome, man. Well, I'm sure you're going to have people looking you up, asking you some questions. We're going to be in contact. Jordan, my man,
Always a
what's up?
pleasure. And this was,
Yeah.
man, I got so many more questions. We're definitely having you on again. So yeah, thanks for coming on. It was so damn informative. It's my mind
Yeah,
is like
no, I
spinning. So
appreciate the
yeah,
opportunity.
Absolutely. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. This is the Starving Podcast. Your host, Justin Romare, Jordan Bishop, and the wonderful Jed. Hopefully inspired you today. You can find us on Instagram at _starving_podcast or on your preferred podcast app. You can also find more nutrition and strength and conditioning information on consistencybreedsgrowth.com and our Instagram handle, which is CBG Online Sports. Guys, it's been real. We're going to chat again soon.
hell yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Science.